Welcome to Nasdaq TradeTalks, where we meet with the top thought leaders and strategists in emerging technologies, digital assets, the regulatory landscape, and capital markets. I'm your host, Jill Malandrino, and after 3 years of collaboration across the South African financial sector, the South African Market Surveillance Code of Conduct, spearheaded by Investec, is being launched. It's a significant step in building transparency, trust, and long-term resilience in the financial markets that we all depend on. Joining me to discuss this development, we have Tony Seo. He's head of regulatory strategy and innovation at Nasdaq. Themba Maseko, head of global markets and compliance at Investec, as well as Happy Shihau. She is head of compliance at Investec Corporate and Institutional Banking. It is great to have all of you joining us this morning. Happy, let's kick it off with you. How would you define market integrity in the context of today's South African capital markets, and what are the biggest threats that it's facing right now?
Thank you so much, Joel. I think market integrity for us is a non-negotiable. I think as compliance officers, at the very core at what we do is really underpinned by ethical standards. And I think, this initiative has really been spearheaded by that to ensure that we can safeguard the financial markets, particularly from a market surveillance perspective. And this code really is purely an artifact of the conversations and the engagements and the input that we've co-crafted, together with the industry. And really at the core of it, market integrity is really the name of the game.
Yeah. And Themba, I'll ask you the same question as well, how you view market integrity in the context of South African markets, if you can give us some insight.
Yeah, I mean, we when it comes to market integrity, it is just doing what is right, and I think it's sometimes we complicate things, we always have to go back to the drawing board. What is market integrity? It's just doing what is right, even if no one is watching you, making sure that you're building processes and systems that are enabling that right behavior, making sure that in the organization where you are part of it, you are doing what is right, even if no one is watching. And I think we're also part of the global world. South Africa cannot have its own integrity. It's across the globe. We all have to strive to do what is right. We've seen a number of challenges, globally in South Africa, which are a big threat to integrity. And I think that's why it's so important for industries to come together and say, what is the risk here? And how do we make sure that we collaborate and make sure that we address these issues? But I mean, to simplify it for me, when it comes to, integrity, is just doing what is right. Let's go back to the basics. Yeah, thank you.
And Tony, if you can give us a high-level overview of how Nasdaq is collaborating with the South African market.
Yeah, so Themba and Happy reached out to us and discussed what they were doing, and we found it fascinating. They had a 3-year plan, and what I love about what they're doing is that it's a grassroots effort that incorporated, really was bottom up and incorporated everyone in the financial markets community. From a Nasdaq perspective, what we really kind of tried to supply was kind of some help, some guidance, some international best practice, and kind of support them as this kind of, as they grew this grassroots community. And in terms of how much they've achieved, it's been amazing.
Happy, with the recent introduction of the new South African Code of Conduct, how is the local market responding?
I think, the market has been incredibly positive about, this milestone. I think we've really had, the likes of Nasdaq as our lead, sponsor, and Steel Eye and Bloomberg, in our prior years. I think to also look at the magnitude of the sponsors that are really rallying behind South Africa as a financial institution, I think gives the code a lot of gravitas, and with that gravitas comes credibility and trust. And I think our peers within the industry have actually caught on to that, and this becomes almost an indicator, or at least a commitment of our integrity to ensure that we are managing the risks that lives within our ecosystem in a way that's fit and appropriate, to ensure again that we reiterate the trust and continue to ensure that the trust actually is weaved in to what we do on a daily basis.
And Themba, you had mentioned collaboration in your first answer. What does meaningful collaboration between technology providers, regulators, and market participants actually look like in practice?
Yeah, it's actually a good question, to answer. If you look at the journey we went through, firstly, the fact that you had regulators, you had exchange members, you had some of the tech providers, you had all the different stakeholders really sitting in one room and having these debates of these principles that we want to build in the code. And I think for me, that's firstly, that's how collaboration works, that the output, everybody has an input, because what it does, it actually affirms, the topic we've been driving, that all the different stakeholders in the ecosystem have a role to play. And we are as strong as our weakest link. And I think that's a very important part. Whether you're providing technology, because if we identify these risks in organizations and we have to rely in your technology, you've got to understand the real issues, and you've got to understand, the challenges that we are facing. So for us, collaboration, it is really bringing everyone under the same roof and defining the risk that we're facing and making sure that whatever solution we're working towards, it's a solution that is fit for purpose, that can really protect, the South African financial market. And I think even this code, it is a clear output of collaboration, and it's been amazing. And I must say that, even though as Investec we've been driving it, there's been a lot of input from different stakeholders in South Africa, the regulators, the exchanges. That's why we are, we are so proud of this output.
Can I maybe just add, Jill, if that's okay?
Of course.
I think one of the other critical components is that we've got a broad spectrum of large, medium, and small broker entities. And we understand that from a cost perspective and sophistication perspective, not every broker has the money to buy tech to actually use for market surveillance purposes. So how we've drafted the code is to ensure that there's actually level playing fields around building an internal framework that any broker, irrespective of size, irrespective of volumes, irrespective of the nature of what they do, that we can all at the core and from a foundational perspective actually have a risk management framework for market surveillance across the sector itself.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. That's an excellent point that you brought up. Tony, from Nasdaq's perspective as the technology provider, how do we view collaboration between all of these entities, and what does it look like for us in practice?
I want to riff off something that Themba said, which is about fit for purpose, right? And even go further and talk about appropriateness. And this isn't a technology thing. This is about the rules, regulations, and processes, right? You can't just take global standards, even no matter how good they are, and just ram them down into any marketplace. As Happy mentioned, there are different types of firms in South Africa. The way it works in South Africa, their problems are different. So as part of the collaboration, this is what's key, in terms of what comes out, is determining what is appropriate, what is fit for purpose. Of course, anything is possible, but there are kind of limiting factors. There's monetary limitations. There are kind of facts in terms of like what should be the focus areas in terms of where we should start now. I think that was one of the key factors that when we were working with them and trying to understand the South African marketplace, that was key for us in terms of our learning, just as kind of like we discussed earlier around taking that best practice, global best practice, and trying to kind of encourage that here. But key, ensure it's appropriate for the local marketplace.
Themba, are there any challenges in establishing shared surveillance, or is the marketplace accepting this relatively in stride?
Yeah, it's actually interesting you're bringing the shared, solution. I think in the previous years during the conference, we've actually discussed that at length, where we're looking at opportunities where you can have smaller brokers, having a shared solution. And obviously, that is feedback to tech providers to say, what if you have a situation in the South African market where you have 5 smaller brokers, is there an opportunity for them to collaborate on a shared solution? But the shared solution, again, it addresses the real issues that, they've identified as a risk. I just wanted to also just, confirm the point that Tony, mentioned, that one of the most important things which we've actually been grateful, of when it comes to Nasdaq is that there's been a clear interest of fully understanding the South African financial market. And I think it's one of the things that we're missing in the past, where when it comes to the tech providers, all they want to do is to come and really sell you the solution, And I think we've been grateful, with Nasdaq, who had an interest to understand what are the challenges. Let's sit with you, let's engage with you. For the past 3 years, Nasdaq has been part of the DNA of what we've finally produced.
I think maybe, sorry, Jill. I think just to add, I think it's very important that when you are partnering with any institution, you need to understand at the core whether the values and philosophies actually align. And I think what we found in the sponsors that we've had, they've come in to learn and understand and unpack our market. And we're not necessarily always here for a commercial benefit, which is very rare to find in partnerships. And I think we've taken that on, and I think the market has actually seen that. I mean, initially they were slightly cautious to say, is this another sell pitch? And I think we were very clear that this is not actually a commercial piece, but it's more around how do we lift our game to ensure that from a global perspective, even though we come from an emerging market, that we can actually adhere and hold ourselves accountable to the best practices globally. And we found the pieces that Nasdaq has brought in and the likes of Bloomberg have brought in has been exactly that. It's around stepping up our game. And we've done that in the most collaborative way, which actually also speaks to, how we do things in South Africa. There's a term we call Ubuntu, and that's really working together. And I think this has been an indicator of the power that comes with collaboration across the entire value chain.
I'm happy you read my mind. I was going to ask you about that in terms of getting that buy-in for a unified approach, whether it's different jurisdictions or competitors. Is that really the message that you're trying to deliver is, collaborations, we're able to advance our markets forward?
100%. And I think, we all are competitors in terms of a commercial perspective. We are all in the market selling financial services and financial products. But the beauty in a compliance and regulatory space, it's a non-competitive environment. This is a place where we can actually bring our ideas and thoughts together to make sure that collectively we move the dial. So we can then work with our regulators and our peers in a very non-competitive way. And I think the trust was organically also built because of how we've actually enabled this environment and created safety in some of the robust conversations and engagements we've had that have then ultimately landed in the code of conduct itself.
Right. And Themba, I'll ask you the same question when you're working within, multiple markets and advancing this collaboration. What are your thoughts in terms of getting that unified buy-in?
Yeah. So firstly, I think for me, and it's one of the things I've seen, throughout this journey is that we all want to be part of the winning South African financial market. And I think, as soon as we landed that point to everyone to say, you can't be winning alone. If you're winning alone in the market that is not adopting some of the best principles, you're most likely not going to have a market in the next 5 years or 10 years. So it was actually clear to all of us to say, we all want to be part of the winning team. And I think at that point for me, as soon as it was engendered and everybody understood, it made it easy because suddenly we realized that the South African financial market, which we are part of it, we all want to see it win. And again, to also just indicate to everyone to say, whether you're a regulator or you're an exchange member, for this whole ecosystem to work, everybody has to play their role responsibly and everybody has to understand their role, because if one doesn't understand, they become the weakest link, and obviously that creates a big risk to the whole ecosystem. And you'll agree with me that the whole world is entangled now. There's a lot of we like when one thing happens in one jurisdiction, it's most likely going to have an impact in other jurisdictions. So it's very important for us to understand that even though we are in South Africa, we're trying to build this credible financial market, but we're part of the whole world. There's a lot of different, investors that are sitting and considering to invest in emerging markets. But when they look at the South African financial market, they need to have trust that if we send our investment there, there's credibility, we can get returns, there's credibility. So I think everybody understood that. And that's why the buy-in, it was important that it happened as we start the journey. And that's why it was so easy for us to go through the journey as the whole industry, and make sure that at the end of the day, we have an output that we are all proud of. Obviously, as Investec, we are an organization that is deeply invested in the South African financial market. That's why it's been a strong drive for us to make sure that we push this, and make sure that at the end of the day, the South African Inc. is part of the winning team.
And Tony, to wrap up with you here, with your experience working across multiple global jurisdictions, what have you found to be the most effective mechanisms for breaking down silos between compliance, tech, and the front office teams when you're implementing a surveillance plan?
Yeah, I'll kind of go through one of the takeaways at the conference. Actually, I'll say a African saying that I heard whilst I was down here, which is that if you want to travel fast, go by yourself. But if you're going to travel far, then you have to travel together. right? I'm taking that everywhere, and that's a great one. And the key is to focus upon culture, right? Everyone in the organization needs to understand that this is important, right? And then when we engage with an organization, we try and engage with everyone across the compliance functions, the trading functions, across everyone within the organization, because everyone needs to be bought in, right? And that's why we were so kind of happy to participate in this type of event, right? Because this type of event is the type of event which enables that cross-silo breakdown, right? Because it changes that culture from the start, right? And really kind of like in terms of just not even from it's not a technology thing, it's really a conceptual thing in terms of where do you think the compliance, the kind of like integrity problem lies. And we really believe it lies with everyone in the organization.
All right. Appreciate all of your insights. Thanks for joining us on Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.
Thank you.
Thank you.